Welcome back to What Do You Know with Nick and Devin. I am Devin.
And I'm Nick.
Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thanks.
Nick.
Yes.
I got a question for you.
Oh, sure.
So there's this old saying.
Is there?
That, like, the definition of insanity is doing something over and over again, expecting different results.
Isn't that the literal definition?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I don't know.
Sure. Old saying.
My name's not Webster.
Boo.
Or Oxford.
Boo.
Or
Go ahead.
Urban Dictionary.
Or Marion. You could have went with Marion.
That was the one I couldn't remember.
God.
Anyway, Britannica. That's more of an encyclopedia. Anyway.
Definitions in there.
So what is something that you've done over and over and over again? It can have led to different results or have repeated results, but you still just do it over and over again. And don't give me some smart ass answer. Breathing, Devin. I do it all the time and I'm still alive. That's how you sound.
First of all, why do I sound like that? Second of all, when have I ever given you an answer like that?
All the time.
Okay, anyway, what have I done over and over?
Yeah.
Can I say this podcast?
Damn.
There's your smart ass remark.
That is.
Son of a bitch.
That's the one I didn't think of. I was thinking of just like bodily functions.
Ew. Why are you only thinking of bodily functions?
I got bodies on the mind.
So, bodies. What have I done over and over expecting different results? Blah, blah, blah. I don't know.
The podcast is a pretty good answer.
It's a pretty good one. I'm not going to lie. I don't know if I can top it. If you want like a more serious answer, I guess I'm not good with
words, speaking,
both words and routine.
Enunciation. Oh,
sometimes.
routines.
Okay, I don't know what these personal attacks are coming from. Jesus. I'm not good with like routines.
Yeah.
So like I want to be the person who like I get up at this time and I make the bed. Like not to be like the TikTok finance bro. Like,
sure.
Get ready with the average day in the life of. But like there is kind of like a nicety to that, and like kind of like a quality to that. And there are times where I'm like, I'm gonna do it, and I get up and it happens for like a week, and then I'm like, why am I doing this to myself?
2 questions.
Oh, number 1.
Do you not set like an alarm for yourself in the morning for
No,
work?
I do.
Oh, okay. Second question, do you have a designated bedtime or a time you like to be in bed?
Bedtime's usually around like 10:30.
Yeah.
And then fall asleep by like 10:30, 11.
Yeah. There's your routine.
Sure. Sure.
Well, it's like you're halfway there.
Sure.
You can flesh out some details in between, but you're getting started.
Yeah, my routine of when I go to bed is really affecting the entire morning routine that I'm looking to do.
Well, if you don't have like a set bedtime and you're just like, oh, whoops, I accidentally stayed up till midnight for 3 days in a row, or like didn't sleep, you know?
Well, I think it's like I would love to go to bed at like 9 p.m.
Wow.
Like that sounds incredible.
That's crazy.
But like I think that's the thing is that I get in the way of myself and I go, this is insane. Why am I going to bed at 9 p.m.?
Up at like 4 in the
5
morning?
a.m. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's fine then.
So that's what I'm saying is like let me go to bed at 9.
Yeah.
To then get up at 5 to then set a routine. But also like, am I really going to bed at 9?
No, because then you're going to screw yourself on the weekends.
Right.
When you go out.
That's what I'm saying. So this is how this all happens, and this is how it all falls apart. And then I come in and talk to my friends, and they're like, why are you so crazy? And I'm like, exactly. So why am I doing this? And I talk myself out of it.
Well,
what do you do over and over? Go ahead. Say something smart. Go ahead.
I didn't think of this because this wasn't my original question that I was going to ask you.
It was off the cuff?
Yeah, it was off the cuff.
Wow.
Yeah, right?
He's a thinker today, folks.
Maybe that's what I do over and over again. I just
thinking?
think of things off the cuff.
Gross. Let's get into the topic.
Gross. So, in the topic of doing things over and over again, definition of insanity, expecting different results, blah, blah, blah.
The old adage.
The old adage, the old say. My question to you is, Nick, what do you know about roguelike?
What?
Rogue-like or roguelikes?
Rogue, spell it.
R-O-G-U-E. Sometimes there's a hyphen here.
That.
L-I-K-E-S.
Like Is it like it's roguelike?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a descriptor?
Mm-hmm.
It's an adjective?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
A genre. I'll give you a hint.
Is it genre?
Yeah.
No.
It's a genre.
Then nothing. If it's a genre of something, nothing. As an adjective, sure. What's the difference?
Yeah.
It's a category. Yes, a category describes things, but I wouldn't necessarily say all adjectives are genres. Genres is a very specific thing when it pertains to literature or movies. Genre doesn't just like happenstance in the world.
Sure. Okay.
It's utilized to categorize and organize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think adjectives are too.
But no, adjectives
But not all adjectives are genres.
Right.
All right. Square
I can
rectangle.
describe something as like vibrant, but is vibrant a genre?
No.
See?
All right. Squares, rectangles. Chill out. You don't know anything about
You're the one that
roguelikes.
came in hot at me, and I don't get to reciprocate?
No, this is our routine.
This is no recip.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about roguelikes,
Please.
and you're going to learn so much.
Roguelikes.
Yeah.
Now you're using it as if it's a noun.
It's in the sense of the category of the genre.
But then it would be one genre. Okay, keep going. I'm just going to pause. I'm just going to wait.
All right, so I'm going to try to not bury the lead here, which is spelled L-E-D-E when you're saying bury the lead, by the way. It's not L-E-A-D, just so people know.
Thank you.
So to try not to bury the lead here, roguelikes are a genre of video game that utilize a few key features.
So you fucking knew I didn't know anything about
but I
this.
still have to ask the question. It's the name of our goddamn show.
Well, 3 episodes ago, I forgot that I had to ask you that
I know.
question. Incredible.
Anyway, so we have a few key features.
Sure.
Trying not to bury the lead. Yada, yada.
Yada, yada.
It's a dungeon crawler with procedurally generated levels. Sometimes turn-based gameplay.
Sure.
But most definitely, there is permadeath or permanent death.
I would hope so.
You'd hope so.
Especially in a roguelike.
Yeah,
Please.
exactly.
You get it.
Asshole.
What the hell is a dungeon scroll? What are we talking about?
Dungeon crawler?
Sure.
You're going through dungeons.
Oh, okay. Multiple dungeons?
Multiple levels of a dungeon.
Sure. I forgot about my multi-level dungeons. That's pretty expensive. It's expensive.
Well, that's why dragons hoard their gold, wizards are after power, etc.
It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. You know what I mean?
I'm going to keep going. There are variations and additional rules for this genre that we'll get to later, but first let's get to the origin of one of the most popular video game genres out there.
Oh.
So it's really weird that you haven't heard about it.
Is it?
Yes.
Is it really weird?
The 70s and 80s were a crazy time, as we all know. Balloon Fest 86. The internet and computers taking off.
Totally.
D&D is created and spreading rapidly. Nerds everywhere.
Running amok, if you will.
Running amok. But what do nerds like to do? Activities surrounding computers and fantasy.
Totally.
So why not combine them? Bam.
Smack.
Video games are born. Sorry I did that right in your face, and I peeked over the mics.
It was great.
Anyway, video games are born. Early video games were often developed by hobbyist programmers and computer hackers. They wanted to recreate, expand, or make their own video games that they had played with particular interest in the 1975 text adventure game called Colossal Cave Adventure.
Okay.
This game was shortened to Adventure or even just Advent if your system didn't support long file names.
Naturally.
So like a quick anecdote, this game was actually based on the creator's maps and experiences caving in Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, which is the longest cave system in the world.
Yeah.
This game was all text. The game would narrate your location and actions, responding to 1 or 2 word commands the player would input as you try to make your way through this cave system, trying to find treasure and gold. The game was a puzzle for the player to see how far they could get into this cave and how much treasure they could find along the way. Pretty fun, pretty basic.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned a long time ago in the Dungeons & Dragons episodes, the famous TTRPG was also a huge influence on these nerds when they were creating these games, particularly the high fantasy settings.
Sure.
So these games or projects that these hobbyists were creating usually didn't spread very far from their point of origin. The level of communication we have now was obviously nowhere near what it is today.
Sure.
But you were able to explore a little bit to find games on this thing called ARPANET, ARPANET.
Okay.
Which was the predecessor to the internet. But the amount of people connected was very limited. Now, ARPANET stood for Advanced Research Projects Agency Network and was the first wide area packet switched network.
Okay.
Essentially, that means like you could exchange data.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Packets of data.
Okay.
It was established by the Advanced Research Projects Agency, which eventually grew into DARPA of the U.S. Department of Defense.
I was going to ask you. I got to do that DARPA episode.
Got to do it. Next time.
Next time.
So oftentimes with that limited communication, folks would develop similar ideas and games without realizing it until the internet grew several years later.
Oh, sure.
Now, something I've talked about several times before is that computer programs were also very limited by the lack of memory computers had available back then. They had less memory than a picture you could take on your phone right now.
Oh, my God.
The
Really?
average picture taken on a smartphone today is probably around 2 megabytes.
Okay.
Maybe more. The 3.5-inch floppy drive, introduced around 1981, which was often utilized for whole programs or even operating systems, could only hold 1.44 megabytes of data.
That's
my
crazy.
memory card for my PlayStation 1 back in the day had only 1 megabyte on it, and it was used to save all of my game files.
That's nuts. And our pictures are double that?
Yeah, which is wild. It's crazy to think that like your picture is more than all of Mario.
Is it just because of the resolution?
Yeah, you're just able to have so much more data because of the resolution and whatnot.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and I did also want to point out, speaking of floppy disks, that as of June 2019, the U.S. nuclear codes are no longer held on floppy disks from the 70s.
Why?
They have since been modernized for what it's worth.
Aw.
Just put
There was something like fun about that, though.
It was pretty silly.
Yeah. Can you imagine me being president and then being like, I need the codes, and they hand you a floppy disk?
And then like you have to get your USB floppy converter.
You have to get the dongle. You have to get the converter. Then you put in the floppy disk. You have to plug in AOL. Yeah, it's a whole thing.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
So that's how much memory the programmers were limited to.
Sure.
Barely anything. To create a full game experience with such limited memory, the programmers relied on a few different tricks like procedural generative dungeons for the players.
Okay.
Now, procedural generation, in the computing sense, is a method of creating data algorithmically as opposed to manually.
Okay.
So instead of coding out all of the different levels, you can kind of give the computer or the program a few key ingredients, I'll say, and then they'll just toss those in randomly.
Oh, okay.
And so through this, you can create large amounts of content in a game without having to go through all of that coding, like I just said. Mm-hmm. You create randomness with less predictability gameplay, which leads to near endless replayability. Because the computer has all of these ingredients for these levels, and they'll throw them in randomly. So you have almost infinite amount of levels at the hand of your computer.
Which is smart.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It's very fun. So with all of that in place, we can now talk about the creation of Rogue, the game that the genre Roguelike is named after.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
I get it. I'm putting the pieces together. All right.
Rogue was a game originally developed for Unix-based systems around 1980 by Michael Toy and Glenn Wickman. I might say Michael Troy, but I mean Michael Toy. I kept typing out Troy on accident.
So it's going to be in your head.
Yeah. Rogue was originally freely distributed to start, but was later commercially available across a few different personal computer systems.
Sure.
And the development for this game started while Toy and Wickman
Already?
Whose last name is Toy? Development.
Whose last name is Kirby?
Fair. Development started while Toy and Wickman were at University of California, Santa Cruz. Toy was looking for some games available over ARPANET, and then came across Colossal Cave Adventure Advent, which inspired him to start writing his own game. Wickman was also writing his own game at the same time he met Toy, and had experience writing his own adventures for TTRPGs like Dungeons & Dragons.
Okay.
So together, with their powers combined, Toy being better at coding and Wickman having a stronger sense of design and story, they developed their own text adventure games to play around in.
Cool.
Getting some experience at creating games.
Yeah.
So around this same time, 1980s-ish, the Berkeley Software Distribution Unix, BSD Unix, operating system was gaining popularity around many of California's universities.
Sure.
A lot of this early computer stuff, obviously, of course, happened all around California's universities. Yeah. That's kind of where the central hub for all of this stuff happened, where the central hub for any type of connectivity was really happening too, like the birthplace of the internet, whatever.
Sure.
It was just all these nerds at the University of California connecting to each other.
Which is interesting that it was California and not something like the Harvards or the MITs, or, you know what I mean?
They certainly had, like, especially MIT, had their fingers in all of this as well. But I think from my knowledge, and I might be wrong, those schools were more of like the technical side.
Got it.
University of California were more of like the, let's see what we can do. Like, let's have some fun.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, they're both pushing the systems, but to their limits, but in different directions. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Different ways.
So with the, we're talking about the BSD Unix operating system. And I mentioned this operating system specifically because it included a key feature to Rogue's development. This thing called Curses, Curses Programming Library by Ken Arnold.
Okay.
So Curses is the full title, allowed for a programmer to place characters, A, E, the ampersand, etc., at any point on a terminal. I'm going to be defining a lot of things here, don't worry.
Okay.
Terminals were essentially what computers were before they had video displays. They had a screen, and like you had these prompts and text inputs that followed certain paths and only allowed certain responses. It was a very basic kind of like binary input-output system for transcribed data. You didn't have graphics capabilities, just text capabilities.
Sure.
But with Curses, programmers could write text-based applications without writing directly for any specific terminal type. So the library would automatically send the correct control characters based on the terminal type. So the programmer could create a character matrix of how the screen should look and let the library do all the work.
Got it.
It's a lot going on there.
Sure. I think I got it.
It's essentially like, I'm going to write this thing out. Curses will be able to translate it for whatever I'm going to be running this program on.
Yes.
But also, with that in mind, I can place these letters wherever I want to on a screen now.
Sure.
So what does this mean for the production of Rogue? You could use the ability to place characters anywhere as a substitute for a graphical interface. So instead of having a graphics card displaying your dungeon to you, I'm going to write out these characters and place them specifically on a screen, so that way I can show you, I can essentially display a map of the dungeon with characters.
Got it. Okay.
I'll explain it a little bit more right now.
I think I get what you're saying. Okay.
So when Toy and Wickman learned about the Curses library and learned how to use it, they came up with the idea, like I said, to use characters as a method of displaying the dungeon on screen to the player. So the period symbol was used for an empty floor space, the plus for doors, whatever the tall line is.
What?
You know, it's just like a vertical line.
Sure.
Whatever that symbol is. And dashes were used for walls.
I feel like it's just called vertical line.
So this vertical line symbol is apparently the non-Unicode name is called pipe. The Unicode name is vertical bar. So
I'm going to go with vertical bar over pipe. Thank you.
So pipes and hyphens were used for walls. And the @ symbol was used to tell where the player was at in the dungeon.
Cute.
So like you would, you had this whole display of these dungeon floors laid out in front of you. And later on too, like as the game development went on, they added in their monsters, and those were each corresponded with the letter that you would call them. So like zombies were a Z in the dungeon kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the story of the game was that a lone adventurer was exploring and finding treasures like the Amulet of Yendor in the Dungeons of Doom.
Ooh.
The name Rogue came about as to make sure the player knew they'd be alone, unlike if they had played D&D and had a party to help them. But they also wanted a short name, so it was easy to type into command prompts.
Sure.
So after they figured out how to display the dungeon, Toy and Wickman needed to figure out how to generate the dungeon in a random manner to increase replayability, which the two found was the main problem with most adventure games. Text adventure, you kind of figured out like, oh, this is the pattern I need to do, and then it just became a race to see how quickly you could go through the adventure.
Okay.
Through trial and error, they came up with a solution through procedural generation. Once they had the dungeon creation down, they fleshed out the space with equipment, magic items, and of course, monsters.
Ooh.
The magic items' powers could only be discovered through experimentation or discovered later in game. And as you went deeper into the dungeon, the monsters would naturally get stronger. All of these objects were randomly placed throughout the dungeon, creating a new experience each time the game was played.
Cool.
So, we have the dungeon crawling through procedural generated levels, but where did the idea of permadeath come from?
Sure.
Through playtesting, of course. Every good game needs to be playtested.
Why would you like take that out of my mouth like that? I was about to say it.
You were too slow.
Yes.
Toy wanted the player to focus on avoiding death in that moment rather than trying to memorize a pattern of actions. But enough playtesters asked to be able to save the game so they could try to complete the game over multiple sessions rather than in just one sitting like it was initially designed for, which is crazy.
Okay. So how long, if you're supposed to play it in one sitting, like how many, it seems like there's an infinite amount of like levels and things like that to kind of
There's not
happen.
an infinite amount of levels. There's like an infinite amount of combinations of levels. So I think there's a finite amount of levels to get to the final place.
Sure.
But you just don't know what you're going to face.
Got it. Okay.
So the playtesters are like, this is going to take us a while. I want to enjoy this. Multiple sessions.
Sure.
So they did it. They added in a save feature. However, it was soon discovered that players were doing what is called save scumming, which, if you don't know,
What?
Is saving then reloading the game if they died or messed up. So like you save right before something, and if you don't like the outcome, you reload.
Oh, that's kind of shitty. Do you do it? Do you save scum? Are you a save scummer?
Yeah.
Fucking know it.
I know. Really only for certain RPGs.
Name names, Devin. Pull out the receipts.
Oh, like Baldur's Gate 3, Mass Effect, Fallout, like any RPG. If there's something that was like, I want to see what happens, and you're like, oh no. But most of the time I try to live with my choices.
Most of the time.
Most of the time.
Fair.
So they were kind of upset about the save scumming because this was kind of like the antithesis of what Toy and Wickman designed the game to be.
Sure.
So they made it so the save file would be erased once it was loaded. So you could load in your save file, but that would be it.
Okay.
And this made the player's death effectively permanent.
Got it. So if you died, you have to go back to the beginning.
You start the whole game
thing.
over.
Got it. Okay.
So through playtesting, we also got a scoreboard feature to compete with friends and other players, as well as improvements made by Ken Arnold himself later on down the road. Rogue blew up from there and went on to expand its development onto newer computer systems with proper graphics capabilities, no longer having the @ symbol be your character.
Sure.
While it wasn't the first game to include procedural generation and permadeath, it did lead to the naming of the roguelike genre. Toy didn't release the source code for Rogue for quite some time, which led to people creating their own versions of the game, just kind of like what happened with the popularity of Colossal Cave Adventure.
Okay.
These dungeon crawling adventure games that were similar to Rogue created the genre of video games roguelike.
There it is. There it is.
Because it's like the game Rogue.
Right. I mean, directly inspired by.
Yeah. Exactly. So the growth of roguelike games has expanded to the genre, becoming one of the most popular popular genres of video games, today. And there's debate as to like what actually determines a proper roguelike.
Yeah.
But the definition I read at the top of this episode came from the Berlin interpretation, which was a definition for roguelikes established at and I can't believe this exists, at the International Roguelike Development Conference of 2008 held in Berlin, Germany.
What? There's a whole conference around it?
I couldn't believe that, but
that's bananas.
Yeah. And I need to note that there are more high value factors, I put that in air quotes, than what I listed, 9 to be exact, with 5 extra low value factors that define a roguelike, but I didn't really want to like read through all of them.
Oh my God.
So just go
look that up.
Look up the Berlin interpretation yourself.
Do you agree with the interpretations?
For the most part.
Sure.
I feel like it's a solid thing. I know there's a lot of people getting like nitpicky about like which is why they had to have this Berlin interpretation, but even there's some discourse about the interpretation itself.
Did they ever ask Toy and Arnold? And
I don't know.
You know what I mean? Like, they're the creators of the game. Just throwing it out there as a console.
They should probably have some say.
Right.
Because there are also some games that fall under the genre of roguelite, with a T, Lite, which may have some but not all of the factors listed. And then there are even subgenres within roguelikes if you want to get really detailed within the genre.
Got it.
It gets really nitty gritty, but like in my head, if it has like permadeath, procedurally generated dungeons, we're good to go. So
what might I know that is a roguelike game?
Have you seen Brian play Hades?
No.
Dead Cells?
No.
Vampire Survivors is more so a roguelite. Slay the Spire?
Mm-mm. Those are the big ones?
I'm reading off a couple that I don't think you'll know any of. The thing is like, while they are popular, they're mostly indie games. Like they're not going to be made by a AAA game developer, you know?
Got it. Okay.
But that's kind of like the fun of them though too.
Sure. So if you game regularly, like you'll probably know these things.
Yes.
Like even if you're in the world a little bit, you might know that. But if you're like completely out of it, you probably aren't a part of that world. Heard.
Yeah. Okay. I knew you were not going to know anything about this.
And you laughed and giggled to yourself about it.
Well,
no answer, folks. No answer.
But just to wrap this whole episode up, if you're looking for some roguelikes to play, there's the ones that I mentioned just now to Nick. But I'm currently playing a fantastic roguelike deck builder called Slay the Spire. I mentioned that. Vampire Survivors is a hoot. Rogue Genesea is fun. And there's even a hockey roguelike that I've played called Tape to Tape.
Tape to Tape.
Pretty funny. Diablo has had some people fight to be included in the roguelike genre, but I believe according to the Berlin interpretation, didn't meet enough criteria, so it's kind of considered like an edge case. And you can laugh at the word edge case. I put in LOL next to it.
It was kind of funny. I have heard of Diablo, though.
I was almost going to do a whole episode about Diablo, but I think I need to spend some time on that one.
Sure, fair.
Because I don't know if I want to talk about the game or the development of the game, because both are very interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe a combo.
I could do another episode like I did D&D.
There you go.
But yeah, so that is that's what a roguelike is.
So what do you enjoy the most about roguelike games then?
I think it's just a fun challenge to see how far you can go, and I think that it's different every time.
Sure.
Because like you call it a run. Like when you're trying to, every chance you play the game, you call it a run.
Okay.
And like having a different experience each run is something exciting, and like you learn the game through playing.
Sure.
And so like currently, like with Slay the Spire, like I said, it's a deck building game. So like you're collecting cards, building up your deck as you climb the spires. You go through the dungeon, crawl through the dungeon.
Okay.
And they don't really tell you how to play. Except like, these are your cards. This is a potion. Discover what they all might mean.
Okay.
And so it's kind of fun to be like, oh, what is this new thing? Like, what is this new item?
Yeah.
And then your next run, you're like, oh, I know what this will do. Like, I'll be able to better utilize it, or like, I don't want that kind of situation.
Yeah.
So like, that's kind of fun. And like, from roguelike, there are other games that have sparked their own genres as well.
Okay.
There are FromSoft games, which you might have heard of, Dark Souls and Elden Ring.
Yeah.
And Dark Souls being the first one, where now there are Souls-like games, where games that have similar features to Dark Souls. And then there's like the Castlevania and Metroid games, who now have a genre of games called Metroidvanias, which also have very specific features.
But do you feel like that just starts to become too niche at some point?
I don't think so. I think Souls-like and roguelike are very broad terms.
Sure.
I think Metroidvania is a very specific feature.
Yeah.
Just because it's like you're side-scrolling dungeon crawling, but it also includes like having to backtrack and like go back and forth between levels that you've previously visited once you've like gotten new equipment, upgraded something, etc.
Okay.
Found a new item.
Sure.
But like Souls-like genre is essentially like, you die, but like you go back to this save point, and like you kind of have to like recollect your experience points that you got in between your save points.
Okay.
And like the bosses are huge, and like you have to dodge a lot. Like it's like a very like, this is very broad, and I understand why roguelike's very broad.
Got it.
Is there going to be a Berlin interpretation of Souls-like games? There might have to be. Maybe I'll start that.
Okay. In Berlin?
When else am I going to go to Berlin?
Well, truly. Let's go to Berlin.
They took down the wall for something.
I could get you across the country, and now we're going to Berlin.
So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting spark of like what defines genres within video games as they're growing and developing, and more the rise of indie developers is coming back.
Okay.
Because like the start of video games were essentially indie developers. I mean, obviously like you had Nintendo and Sony and all the big guys, but like to start, you had people just creating text-based games because they were having fun and learning how to code on these new weird math rocks, essentially.
Sure.
And so then like in came the big corporations, the big developers who were creating these beautiful games but have lost their way, so to speak. And now we have another rise of indie games and indie developer companies as well.
Yeah.
So
to take on the man.
Hopefully the video game industry is out of control.
Too commercialized.
Yeah. I mean, Mariah Carey and Fortnite, come on.
What?
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you about that later. But anyway, that's Roguelikes. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks, Nick, for staying awake for it.
Thank you.
And make sure to like and subscribe everywhere on the internet at WDYK_podcast. We also joined Blue Sky recently, so make sure to follow us there at WDYK.bsky.social. What a mouthful.
Nice. Good memorization.
Thanks. I did acting.
I did acting.
But thanks, and we'll catch you next time.
Okie dokie.
All right, bye now.
Goodbye.